Jake Marlowe didn't expect to die today, but crashing onto an alien death trap of a planet, his ship on fire and deadly creatures stalking him, wasn't exactly part of the plan either. His shuttle hurtled toward the jagged surface of Verdanus, alarm screaming, the controls unresponsive. He gritted his teeth, wrestling with the stick as the ground rushed up to meet him. The impact was brutal, sending a shockwave through his body, but there was no time to think about the pain. As the smoke cleared, one thing became clear. This planet, officially labeled uninhabited in every galactic report, was anything but. Something moved in the shadows, something big, and it was coming for him. He was alone, stranded, and whatever was out there wasn't friendly. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and surveyed the wreckage. His shuttle was done for. The landing gear had been ripped clean off, and half the hull was embedded in a rocky outcrop. There was no calling for help. His communication systems were fried. He was stranded. Jake let out a breath, frustration gnawing at him. Verdanus wasn't supposed to be on his route. His mission had been a routine supply run, simple and uneventful, until the ship's systems mysteriously failed, diverting him to this planet. Verdanus, according to every galactic report, was an uninhabited rock, a toxic world with no life and no value. But standing here, breathing in the thick air, Jake knew something was off. The glowing plants, the strange atmosphere, none of it fit the description. He grabbed his survival pack from the shuttle, slinging it over his shoulder, and did a quick inventory. Oxygen reserves were intact, water and rations for a few days, a plasma sidearm, and some basic medical supplies. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. As he took a few steps away from the shuttle, movement on the ridge above caught his eye. His muscles tensed. Something was up there, watching him. Slowly, he crouched behind a nearby rock, keeping his eyes fixed on the ridge. The light from the bioluminescent plants illuminated the figure, a massive creature, much larger than anything he'd expected to find on an uninhabited planet. Its skin shimmered like dark oil, reflecting the glow of the plants. Long, clawed limbs dug into the rocky ground, and its glowing green eyes locked onto him with predatory focus. Jake's heart pounded. This thing wasn't supposed to be here. Nothing like this was supposed to be on Verdanus. He instinctively reached for the plasma sidearm on his belt, but he knew better than to make any sudden moves. The creature growled, its eyes narrowing as it took a step closer. He slowly backed away, scanning his surroundings for cover. His eyes landed on a narrow gap between two boulders just ahead. If he could reach it, the creature wouldn't be able to follow him in. But he needed to move fast. Taking a deep breath, Jake made his move. He sprinted toward the gap, the creature letting out a deafening roar as it gave chase. Its claws scraped against the ground, gaining on him with terrifying speed. Jake pushed himself harder, diving into the crevice just as the creature's claws slashed the air behind him. Panting, he pressed his back against the cool rock, his heart racing. The creature growled from the other side of the boulders, frustrated but unable to reach him. Its glowing eyes peered at him through the narrow gap, and for a moment, Jake thought it might try to tear through the rocks. But after a few tense minutes, the creature backed off, retreating into the shadows of the ridge. The eerie silence of the planet returned, leaving Jake alone with his thoughts. He exhaled slowly, trying to steady his breathing. His mind raced. Verdanus was supposed to be a dead world, with no signs of life, no civilization, no threat. Yet here he was, face to face with a creature that clearly didn't belong in any galactic report. What else had been missed? Jake knew he couldn't stay in the crevice forever. If there was one predator, there could be more. His first priority was survival, but more than that, he needed to figure out why he'd been diverted here in the first place. His shuttle systems hadn't just failed by accident. Something, or someone, had caused it. And as he peered out from his hiding spot, scanning the rocky landscape for any more signs of movement, he couldn't shake the feeling that this crash landing wasn't random. Something had brought him to Verdanus, and whatever it wasn't finished with him yet. Jake's breathing had finally steadied as he crawled out from the narrow crevice. His senses were on high alert, scanning the alien landscape for any signs of the creature, or worse, others like it. But the ridge was quiet now. the eerie glow from the bioluminescent plants casting soft shadows over the jagged terrain. Whatever that thing was, it was gone, at least for now. He needed to get moving. He couldn't stay exposed out here. There had to be something, shelter, a vantage point, anything that could give him a better sense of what he was up against. As he strapped his sidearm securely to his belt, Jake's mind raced with questions. That creature was unlike anything recorded in the galactic database. If Verdanus was supposed to be uninhabited, what else had they gotten wrong? With no way to communicate and no backup coming, he knew it was up to him to figure things out. He set off, following a path along the base of the ridge, keeping the glowing plants to his right. They seemed to react to his presence, pulsing faintly as he moved past them. The landscape stretched on in a seemingly endless maze of rock and strange flora, making it hard to get his bearings. His survival training kicked in: prioritize resources, find high ground, and gather as much information as possible. After trekking for an hour, he came upon a rocky outcrop that jutted upward, providing a clear view of the surrounding area. Climbing to the top, Jake hoped he'd be able to spot any landmarks or anything that didn't fit the barren description of Verdanus. His boots scraped against the rocks as he ascended, his muscles aching from the exertion. But when he reached the summit, what he saw made him stop in his tracks. Far in the distance, nestled between two towering cliffs, was a structure. At first, he thought it might just be more rock formations, but as he squinted through the faint glow of the landscape, he could see the unmistakable outline of something artificial. It was dark, angular, and clearly not part of the natural environment. It wasn't large, but it was big enough to be some kind of outpost or facility, though there were no signs of movement. Jake frowned. There were no records of any installations on Verdanus, no mention of any stations or outposts. So what was it doing there? His instincts told him this was the key to everything. Whatever had brought him to Verdanus, whatever had tampered with his ship, had to be connected to that facility. And if there was a facility, there might be answers, but reaching it wouldn't be easy. The cliffs surrounding the structure were steep, and the path looked treacherous. Worse, there was no telling what other creatures roamed these lands, but Jake had no choice. He had to investigate. As he descended from the outcrop, something strange happened. His wrist communicator, which had been silent since the crash, suddenly blipped to life. Blip, blip. Jake froze, staring down at the device in disbelief. The faint signal was weak, barely audible, but it was there. A signal meant technology, and technology meant someone else was out there. He quickly checked the readout. The signal was coming from the same direction as the structure, though it was distorted, scrambled, as if it was trying to broadcast through interference. The readout showed an intermittent source, not automated but deliberate, as though someone or something was trying to reach out. His pulse quickened. If someone else was here, if they were sending a signal, it meant that whatever was happening on Verdanus wasn't an accident. It was deliberate. With renewed urgency, Jake set off toward the cliffs. Following the faint signal, he moved quickly, keeping his eyes peeled for any sign of danger. As the twin suns dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the rocky terrain, Jake reached the base of the cliffs. The signal had grown stronger, though still fragmented. The structure loomed above him now, dark and silent. Up close, it was clear this wasn't a temporary outpost. It was made from a sleek, black metal, with sharp, angular edges that glinted faintly in the dim light. The architecture didn't look human. It was too advanced, too alien. As Jake crept closer, he noticed something else. The air around the facility seemed different, heavier, charged with a strange energy that made his skin tingle. It wasn't just the atmosphere of the planet. This place was generating something powerful. He approached the entrance cautiously. There was no sign of movement. No guards. No defenses that he could see. The door was partially open, a faint light flickering from within. Jake's instincts told him this was a trap, but he had no other options. Whatever was happening on Verdanus, this facility was the center of it. Taking a deep breath, he stepped inside. The interior of the facility was stark and minimalist, with smooth black walls and strange, glowing panels that pulsed rhythmically with an eerie green light. The air was cool and stale, and a faint hum reverberated through the walls, like the facility itself was alive. As he moved deeper into the structure, Jake's wrist communicator blipped again, louder this time. The signal was stronger here, more focused. Someone or something was definitely trying to communicate. Jake followed the sound, his pulse quickening as he entered a large chamber at the heart of the facility. It was massive, with a raised platform at the center, and strange alien machinery lining the walls. At the far end of the chamber was a console, glowing faintly with the same green light as the rest of the facility, and standing in front of the console was a figure. Jake froze, his hand instinctively going to his sidearm. The figure was humanoid, tall and slender, wearing a dark, armored suit that shimmered in the light. Its back was turned to him, but Jake could see it was working on the console, its hands moving rapidly over the controls. "Hey!" Jake called out, his voice echoing through the chamber. The figure stopped, slowly turning to face him. Jake's breath caught in his throat. The figure wasn't human. Its face was obscured by a sleek, black helmet with no visible features, only a glowing visor that pulsed with the same green light as the rest of the facility. For a moment, neither of them moved. The air between them crackled with tension. Then the figure spoke, its voice cold and mechanical. "You're not supposed to be here." Jake's hand tightened on his sidearm. "Neither are you." The figure tilted its head slightly, as if considering him. "You don't understand what's happening here. Human, this planet isn't what you think." Jake took a step forward, his heart pounding. "Then explain it to me." The figure was silent for a moment. Then it reached up and pressed a button on the console. Instantly, the room filled with a low, rumbling hum, and the walls began to shimmer with images. Holographic projections of the planet, its surface, its atmosphere, and at the center of it all was something massive, something buried deep beneath the surface of Verdanis. A weapon. Jake stared at the projection, his mind racing. Whatever this facility was, it wasn't just some outpost, it was a control center. And the weapon it was connected to wasn't just powerful, it was catastrophic. The figure stepped closer, its glowing visor reflecting the holographic images. "You've stumbled onto something far beyond your understanding," it said, its voice low. "This weapon has been dormant for centuries, but soon it will awaken. And when it does, the galaxy will change forever." Jake's blood ran cold. He had crash-landed on a planet he wasn't supposed to visit, encountered creatures that shouldn't exist, and now he was standing face to face with something threatening to unleash a weapon that could destroy everything. He had to stop it. But before he could react, the figure turned back to the console and pressed another button. The holographic images disappeared, and a deafening alarm blared through the facility. The weapon was activating. The alarm was deafening, echoing through the alien facility as red lights flashed in rhythm with the blaring sound. Jake's heart pounded as he stared at the figure in the dark suit. The room felt like it was closing in around him, the weight of the impending danger suffocating. The figure turned its glowing visor toward him again, the cold mechanical voice cutting through the chaos. "You shouldn't have come here. Human, now it's too late." Jake didn't hesitate. He raised his sidearm and fired, aiming directly at the console. The blast of plasma hit the control panel with a loud crackle, sending sparks flying across the room. The alien figure recoiled, but the damage had already been done. The weapon was in the process of activating. "You think you can stop it with brute force?" the figure said, the distorted voice calm even as the facility buzzed with energy. "This is beyond you." Jake gritted his teeth, moving quickly to cover as he assessed the situation. The holographic display that had shown the massive underground weapon had vanished, but the rumbling in the walls hadn't. He could feel the entire structure coming alive beneath his feet. Whatever power source the alien figure had tapped into was beyond anything he had seen. "I don't care what this planet is or what you think you're about to do," Jake said, his voice low, controlled. "But I'm not letting you activate that weapon." The figure stood tall, its glowing visor narrowing, almost like it was studying him. "This weapon is a correction. It will restore order to a galaxy plagued by chaos." Jake stepped forward, his grip tightening on his sidearm. "Order? You mean destruction?" The figure tilted its head slightly, as though Jake's words were an alien concept. "The weak must fall for the strong to lead. This weapon will wipe away the old, broken systems and bring about a new age. As the figure moved closer to the now damaged console, Jake realized that time was slipping away. This wasn't just about stopping the figure. He needed to stop whatever countdown had started when the alarm began blaring. If that weapon activated, everything he knew about the galaxy could be destroyed. The rumbling beneath his feet intensified. The ground itself trembling, the walls of the facility began to pulse with a strange energy. And Jake could feel the vibration in the air. He had to think fast. Where is the power source for this place? Jake demanded, glancing around the room. There had to be a core, something feeding the energy into this structure. If he could find it, he might be able to shut it down. The figure didn't answer. But Jake caught the briefest flicker of movement in its visor, a glance toward a door on the far side of the chamber. It was subtle, but it was enough. Jake sprinted toward the door, dodging past the alien figure. He fired another shot over his shoulder as he ran, buying himself enough time to burst through the door and into a long, dimly lit corridor. The pounding of his boots on the metallic floor echoed as he ran, the alarm still blaring behind him. The corridor led deeper into the facility, and the further Jake went, the more the walls seemed to hum with power. He was getting closer to the core, and the energy it radiated felt like static in the air, making the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He knew the alien figure wouldn't be far behind, but he couldn't afford to slow down. His thoughts raced as he tried to figure out how he would stop the activation. If this was an ancient weapon, there had to be safeguards, something that would allow him to shut it down before it unleashed its power. At the end of the corridor, Jake came to a massive door, sleek, black metal, like the rest of the facility, with strange symbols etched into the surface. It hummed with energy, and as Jake approached, it slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a vast chamber beyond. The room was dominated by a massive, glowing core, a swirling sphere of blue energy, suspended in the center of the room by sleek, alien machinery. The core pulsed rhythmically, and the entire facility seemed to hum in time with it. This was the heart of the weapon, the power source that was driving the activation. Jake moved cautiously toward the core, scanning the room for any sign of the alien figure. The chamber was quiet, save for the hum of the machinery and the occasional crackle of energy from the core. He could feel the heat radiating from it. An immense, almost living power. This is it, Jake muttered to himself, eyeing the control panels surrounding the core. If I can disable this, I can stop the whole thing. He approached one of the panels, its screen filled with alien symbols and diagrams. His fingers hovered over the controls as he tried to make sense of the interface. The language was foreign, but some of the symbols were familiar enough. Emergency shutdown procedures, power regulations. He had seen enough alien tech over the years to recognize the basics. But just as he was about to initiate the shutdown, the door behind him slid open. The alien figure stood in the doorway, its visor glowing brightly. You don't understand what you're about to do. Jake didn't flinch. I understand enough. If this thing goes online, millions of lives will be lost. The figure stepped forward, its voice colder now. Those lives are necessary sacrifices. The galaxy has been on the brink of collapse for too long. This weapon will bring order. You keep saying order, Jake said, keeping his hand near his sidearm. But all I see is destruction. The alien didn't respond, and for a moment, the room was silent except for the hum of the core. Then, without warning, the figure lunged at Jake, its movement swift and deadly. Jake dodged to the side, narrowly avoiding the figure's attack as he rolled across the floor and fired his sidearm. The shot missed, ricocheting off the walls of the chamber, but it gave Jake enough time to scramble to his feet. The two clashed, Jake's human agility and training against the alien's raw strength and speed. Every blow the figure threw was precise, calculated, and Jake had to move quickly to keep from being overwhelmed. But Jake had something the alien didn't: desperation. In a moment of quick thinking, Jake feigned a stumble, causing the figure to overextend its reach. Seizing the opportunity, Jake grabbed a nearby cable from the machinery and yanked it free, sending a surge of energy through the room. The power fluctuation caused the core to flicker, and the alien figure momentarily staggered, its systems disrupted by the overload. Jake didn't hesitate. He lunged at the control panel and slammed his hand down on the emergency shutdown sequence. The core sputtered, the glow fading as the shutdown sequence initiated.
The alarms began to die down,
And the rumbling beneath the facility slowly stopped. The weapon was powering down. The alien figure, regaining its composure, glared at Jake through its visor. But it was too late. The weapon had been disabled. "You don't know what you've done," the figure growled, its voice filled with anger. This was our only chance. Jake stood firm, his sidearm still trained on the alien. "You've already lost." The figure took a step back, its body language tense. But instead of attacking again, it turned and fled, disappearing through the door as swiftly as it had appeared. Jake exhaled, the tension in his body slowly releasing. The facility had been saved, for now, but he knew this wasn't over. Whatever organization the alien had been working for would come back for the weapon. He had uncovered something bigger than just a malfunctioning shuttle. This was part of a galactic conspiracy, a plan to wipe out entire civilizations and reshape the galaxy. As he stood there, staring at the now dormant core, Jake realized that stopping the weapon was only the beginning. Whoever was behind this wouldn't stop until they had control of it. And Jake Marlowe, the lone human who had survived where no one else could, was now the only thing standing in their way. The air in the now silent facility was heavy, almost oppressive. Jake Marlowe stood near the deactivated core, his heart still racing from the confrontation with the alien figure. He had managed to stop the weapon's activation, for now, but the gravity of what had just happened weighed heavily on him. He glanced at the glowing machinery around the core, noting how quickly things could spiral out of control. If even one part of the system was reactivated, this was more than just a power source. It was a catalyst for destruction, and the people behind it wouldn't stop until they had it. His mind raced as he considered his options. The alien had escaped, but Jake doubted it had gone far. More reinforcements would be coming soon. If they got their hands on this facility again, it would be catastrophic. Jake knew he couldn't stay here, not with the possibility of more enemies arriving any moment. He had to destroy the core permanently, make sure that no one could ever use this weapon. But doing so wasn't going to be easy. The power source was volatile, and a misstep could set off a chain reaction that would obliterate not just the facility, but everything for miles around, including Jake. As he weighed his options, the faint sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway behind him. Jake's muscles tensed, his sidearm already in his hand as he turned to face the doorway. But instead of the alien figure, a woman stepped through. She was tall, with dark hair tied back, her eyes sharp and her movements quick. She wore the same sleek, black armor as the soldiers he'd seen earlier, but there was something different about her. She didn't seem surprised to see him. In fact, she looked almost relieved. "So you're the one who shut it down," she said, her voice calm but tinged with urgency. Jake's grip on his sidearm tightened. "Who are you?" The woman held up her hands, a gesture of non-threat. "I'm not with them," she said. "The Dominion sent me here to infiltrate the operation and stop it, just like you." Jake's brow furrowed. The Galactic Dominion. He had heard of them. Of course, an underground group that operated outside of the Union's control, known for their covert missions and ruthless tactics. If they were involved, things were more complicated than he'd thought. "I don't trust the Dominion," Jake said, not lowering his weapon. "They're known for manipulating situations like this for their own gain." The woman's gaze was steady. "I don't blame you. But right now, we're on the same side. The people behind this weapon aren't interested in anything but absolute power. If they activate it, the entire balance of the galaxy will shift, and countless lives will be lost. The Dominion wants to prevent that. I want to prevent that." Jake studied her, weighing her words. She seemed sincere, but trust was a luxury he couldn't afford right now. Still, he couldn't do this alone, and if she was telling the truth, they had a common goal. "I shut it down," Jake said, nodding toward the core. "But it's not permanent. The weapon can be reactivated. We need to destroy the core for good." The woman stepped forward, her eyes scanning the machinery. "The core's linked to an energy relay system," she explained. "If we can overload the relay, it'll destabilize the entire structure and collapse the power source. But that means the whole facility will go down." We won't have much time to get out. Jake nodded. Then we'd better move fast. Together, they approached the control panel surrounding the core. The woman began inputting commands into the console, working quickly but precisely, her fingers moving across the alien interface with practiced ease. Jake kept an eye on the entrance, knowing that any moment, reinforcements could arrive. As the machinery hummed to life, the core flickered, its pulsing energy growing unstable. "I'm setting it to overload," the woman said, her voice steady. "Once it hits critical mass, the whole thing will implode. We'll need to be out of here before that happens." Jake glanced at her. "How long do we have?" 5 minutes. Tops, she replied, locking in the final command. The core's glow intensified, and the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. The countdown had begun. "Let's move," Jake said, and together, they sprinted toward the exit. As they raced through the corridors, the facility shuddered around them, lights flickering and machinery sparking from the overload. The air was thick with tension, and the distant hum of the core grew louder with each passing second. They burst through the main doors and into the open air, the alien landscape stretching out before them. The twin suns hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the rocky terrain. Behind them, the facility groaned, its structure straining under the pressure of the impending explosion. "We need to get further away," the woman shouted, her voice barely audible over the rumbling. They sprinted across the barren ground, their boots kicking up dust as the ground shook beneath them. The facility was moments away from collapse, and they could feel the energy building behind them like a tidal wave. Jake's lungs burned as they ran, but he pushed himself harder, knowing that stopping was not an option. Suddenly, a massive explosion ripped through the air. The ground buckled beneath their feet as the facility detonated in a blinding flash of light and energy. The force of the blast sent them both sprawling to the ground, the shockwave rolling across the landscape and shaking the very earth. For a moment, everything was still. Dust and debris filled the air, and the distant sound of crumbling rock echoed in the silence. Jake slowly pushed himself to his feet, his ears ringing from the explosion. The facility was gone, nothing but a smoking crater remained where it had stood. Beside him, the woman rose, wiping the dust from her armor. They exchanged a glance, both of them breathing hard from the effort. "It's done," she said, her voice quieter now. Jake nodded, his gaze lingering on the smoking ruins in the distance. "Yeah, it's over." But even as the words left his mouth, he knew it wasn't really over. The weapon had been destroyed, but the conspiracy behind it still loomed large. Whoever had built that facility, whoever had been pulling the strings, they wouldn't stop just because one installation had been taken down. "You know they'll come after us," the woman said, echoing his thoughts. This was just one piece of the puzzle. The people behind this, they won't give up. Jake holstered his sidearm and turned to face her. "Then we'll be ready." The woman offered him a small, knowing smile. "You're not bad for a lone survivor." He chuckled, shaking his head. "I could say the same about you." For a moment, they stood there in silence, the weight of what they had just survived settling over them. The suns were beginning to dip below the horizon, casting the landscape in deep shadows. But for the first time since Jake had crash-landed, he felt like there was a glimmer of hope. "So," Jake said, glancing at her, "what now?" The woman looked out at the horizon, her eyes thoughtful. "Now, we regroup. We figure out who's behind all of this, and we stop them before they try again." Jake nodded, feeling a surge of determination. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. "Let's get out of here," the woman said, gesturing toward the ridge where a shuttle had landed, barely visible in the distance. "We've got work to do." As they made their way toward the shuttle, the sun finally dipped below the horizon, leaving the alien landscape in darkness. But despite the challenges that lay ahead, Jake felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had survived where no one else could, and now, with a new ally by his side, he was ready for whatever came next.